into the wisdom of David Wilcock. His website, divinecosmos.com. If you have not gone to that website yet, he's probably got to be one of the greatest thinkers of our time. Some call him the reincarnated Edgar Cayce. Well, I'll let you decide that. But we're going to talk with him about the cosmos next on Coast to Coast AM. David Wilcock is an author, lecturer, researcher, star of his own television program with the Gaia Television Network. He is a subject of an authored international bestseller, The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. His work gives definitive support to the idea that change in matter, energy, consciousness now occurring on the earth. And I get so many emails when David's on from people who are simply spellbound by some of the things that he says. And I will also publicly admit that years ago I stiffed David on lunch, and I still have not paid for the lunch. David, welcome back.
Well, thank you, George. I have the distinct radio advantage of being in the voice of a half an octave lower than usual, thanks to recovering from a virus. So,
oh my gosh, you actually
the baritone we need here.
You sound pretty good.
Well, thank you.
I mean, my God, you sound like a cross between Lauren Bacall and some other radio person. Well, good. How have you been besides the virus?
I'm seeing some very positive changes in the world that are finally starting to pay off, things that various insiders have been telling me that I've been leaking on my website for years. And we're at that stage in the game where it's that delicious tickle that hasn't quite turned into laughter yet. You know, it's not the media hasn't burst out laughing about the truth about UFOs, but man, we're getting tickled, aren't we? It's unbelievable.
We sure are. Hey, David, I want to talk just a little bit about Edgar Cayce because it somehow ties into some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. Well, when that book came out, of course, The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, and the pictures of Edgar Cayce, a younger version, and you were almost identical. I mean, it was amazing. If I remember, Cayce was wearing like a little top hat or something like that.
That's right.
But you had the same profile, the same nose shape, everything. Do you think you might be the reincarnated Edgar Cayce?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that when someone has as much of an impact as he did, their soul becomes like a template that could affect multiple future incarnations. So I want to make that clear. I think that any number of people could have soul attributes that are connected to historical figures. This is why we hear so many people, when people think that they've become a reincarnation and they have a spiritual awakening, they don't say, yeah, I was a peasant named Miroslav in Russia in the 16th century. You know?
That's right. I was Cleopatra. I was Mark Antony. I was something like that. So true. So true.
So I feel like what has happened is I've been handed an opportunity because there is a stunning facial resemblance, and we have the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, who's actually done the legwork mostly in the Middle East, where they have over 2,000 cases of people who remember being someone else, and they have very specific data that they recall, which Stevenson would then go and find out if it was true. And in all of the authentic cases, you have a stunning facial similarity, which, of course, throws everything that we know about biology and heredity up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Because how the heck do you get faces looking alike when you're born with completely different parents?
Good point.
So facial morphology has to have something to do with the soul and not just the Mendelian genetics of how your two parents mix together.
Unless there's an incredible probability that Edgar Cayce's parents looked like your parents.
Well, I did apparently have, I had the same father. You know, that is a very interesting fact, which we also documented on my website. Edgar Cayce's father was called the Squire. That was the name he used. And my father would only shop at the Squire shop for men's clothing.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Might your father have been the reincarnated Edgar Cayce father?
Exactly.
Wow.
And remember, too, that there is a science behind reincarnation. And I know that a lot of your listeners are identifying themselves as Christian. And one of the most important things that Casey was teaching was a sort of corrected version of Christianity, corrected in terms of what his higher guidance was saying. Those who don't know who Casey is should bear in mind that there's over 14,000 documented cases of him having nothing but someone's name and address and a time that this reading would happen. And he would loosen up his collar and his cuffs and go into a deep meditative state of trance in which he was unresponsive to physical pain. There were doctors sticking needles under his fingernails, and he didn't wake up. And he would speak with omniscient intelligence, including the ability to give a precise medical diagnosis with no information whatsoever about the patient, other than their location. And what we find out is that Christianity has been bastardized by essentially the Roman government,
Sure.
which turned it into a tool for the manipulation of the masses and eliminated anything that would threaten this idea of either pay your taxes or you're going to burn in hell for all eternity. Well, if you restore, see, when Emperor Constantine used his power to create the New Testament in the Bible, he just simply tossed out anything he didn't like that was going to get in the way of creating this totalitarian government. And one of the things he tossed out was reincarnation, but he didn't get everything. They weren't specific, they weren't thorough enough. And so there are certain clues, and again, it's going to make me sound like a Bible thumper, so I apologize, but one of the ones that all of these books about Jesus say that you got to clue into, and you'll see it in the Bible, when it jumps out at you, you're like, oh my God. It said, somebody asks Jesus, who has sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, wait a minute. Okay, I get the parents thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did his parents sin, and then there was some penitence that this guy had to be born blind? But this man, how did this man sin
as a baby
if he was born blind?
Right.
Right? So that's one of the ones that they missed. But then you got to go back, and I do this in my book, The Synchronicity Key. There's a lot of data in there. I go back to one of the original founding fathers of Christianity who actually spoke to St. Clement of Alexandria, who was bosom buddies with St. Peter. Okay, so you got St. Peter, St. Clement, and then you got this guy named Origen. So St. Peter shared with St. Clement, who then shared with Origen, the hidden teachings that Jesus is talking about in the Bible that they don't say. Because remember, the apostles are all bummed out that Jesus is always using parables. There's all these metaphors he keeps making.
Yeah, why did he hide so many phrases that way?
It's very strange, right? Like, what does he mean when he says that the tiniest seed has become the largest tree in the garden?
Yeah.
You know? What we see is that Jesus had to honor free will, and he had to disguise the most important teachings in forms that if people were not actually ready to see them, they wouldn't see them. And the same thing happens in our dreams. Our dreams are conveying very useful information to us, but if you don't want to see what it's saying, you don't have to, because it's always veiled. So that veiling is how you're able to convey information without interrupting on people's free will. Now, there are people out there, you've undoubtedly had them on the show, who try to say that this whole thing was a confabulated series of historical accounts put together by the Roman government. I don't believe that. I believe that there was a man who was here on earth who did these phenomenal things, and that happened for our own greater good, even though fundamentalist religion was going to be created from it, which in some cases is the veritable manifestation of the Antichrist that is described in the Bible. Why does it say in the book of Revelations the Antichrist was wounded on the side and yet did live and was fashioned into an idol to be worshipped by all peoples and all nations of all tongues?
Precisely.
That sounds an awful lot like something we know. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of scholars who have said the only logical answer to who the Antichrist in the Bible is would be the Christianized, government-sanctioned Jesus, which is not what the teaching was. So If Jesus is teaching reincarnation, which is what Origen was told, by the way, that the biggest secret teaching of Jesus is reincarnation. If that's true, then that means that no matter how badly you screw up, you're going to get another chance.
That's right. And then another chance, and another chance.
And so one of the interesting things that the Casey readings added to the Christian lexicon is this idea of soul groups, which were traced meticulously in the Casey readings, that the people that are the closest to you in your life are the people that have been the closest to you in other lifetimes. And you continue to work out issues with them from lifetime to lifetime. And this includes the villains, not just the people you get along with. And even the great villains in our history are reincarnating with us and fulfilling parallel roles. And again, getting back to what I said in Synchronicity Key, I show undeniable evidence that Hannibal, the great Carthaginian warlord who was the plague of Rome during Rome's time, reincarnated as Hitler. And they did very similar things, exactly one age of the zodiac apart, 2,160 years apart.
Do you think the Antichrist is alive on the planet now?
Well, if you actually go for what the Casey readings say the Antichrist is, they describe it as an influence. Insofar as that influence has materialized in various, what they would call in esoteric science, archons or human servants of the agenda, then yes, there are multiple humans here on Earth who are embodying the Antichrist job and fulfilling that archetype. And you have to understand that someone who is in this modality, they do not think they are evil. They believe that they are humanity's salvation.
Right. They do not believe they're a product of the devil at all.
They don't even think there is a devil. They think that's a gross misinterpretation. Yeah. And they think that Lucifer is actually the good guy and is the patron saint of all the cool ancient mystery school teachings. So you start hearing this over and over again. In fact, when somebody tries to pose as an insider and wants to get on my good side, one of the first things I ask them is, well, what's your opinion on Lucifer, and just see what they say.
That's interesting. A trick question, huh?
Yeah.
Well, with Casey, he did an incredible job with readings, health readings, recommendations, therapies, earth changes. Do you have that feeling that you do this too?
Well, it is a documented fact that on my website I began advertising intuitive readings in 1999, and I continued doing that as a full-time job until 2008 or 2007, I believe. Yeah, it was 8 years. So during that time, I have all the cassettes still in my closet. It's 90-minute cassettes in which I would talk to people for the first 45 minutes about what they wanted to know. And that was important. You don't want to just go in blind. What the person offers as far as what they're seeking has everything to do with what they're going to get. Now, these readings in certain cases, I would do a very similar process as Casey, except that I would self-hypnotize, and I was conscious of the sound of my voice talking, but I would try to detach from the material. So I wasn't actually tracking what I was saying. I just allowed myself to speak, and that might not be something people could identify with, except you have to remember that this involves a very deep state of meditation in which it's a similar thing where if you're first waking up in the morning, you hear all this chatter in your mind, and everybody normally just thinks that chatter is garbage and, oh yeah, I'm just here, I'm daydreaming or whatever. But it turns out that everyone has this ability. We all have a nice little CB radio in our mind, and if you start paying attention to these little murmurings, it turns out that they are intelligently derived, and you have to tune in, you have to get reception. It's not like the first day you do it, you're going to get great results.
David, have you always been a tuned-in kind of person?
I would say that I've always had ESP, or extrasensory perception, since I was a small child. It still did take a lot of work I was fortunate enough to have the resource of Coast to Coast AM, and at the time it was Art Bell, and he was bringing people on who were remote viewers, and the absolutely stunning accuracy that these remote viewers could get, where they can work up to a point where they have 99% perfection in identifying the source of blind coordinates, where they are just given numbers and have no idea what it is, and then they start sketching what it is. Well, I got all the books, and I read up on remote viewing, and I learned what they did to screen out their conscious mind, and I put it into practice, except that I use those protocols to derive verbal information instead of to derive location information like they do. And so I used a very exacting scientific protocol, and I began to get information that was extremely accurate in predicting the future, and it happened so many times that it was totally astonishing, and a very wise source of guidance that identified itself as my soul. And so to be able to talk directly to your soul is quite an honor. But as the saying goes, it also has great responsibility, and once you start doing this kind of work, you have to be extremely, extremely high integrity. You cannot afford to take liberties with your morals, your ethics, and the quality of your treatment of other people. If you start to act in a controlling or manipulative or consciously unloving manner towards other people, you open yourself up to all kinds of trouble.
No mistakes.
Well, you're allowed to make mistakes, but you pay for them, and you're going to pay a lot harder than most people would.
Well,
so I have to be extremely careful. There's probably some karmic reason why I'm sick right now. I don't really know what it is. It's not like I...
You never get sick, David.
Well, I used to get sick a lot, but I also wasn't exercising every day. Now I walk every day. And I don't really know what the karmic reason is. I know that I have wrestled with the fact that things in the world have not yet changed as much as I hoped they would, and that does cause me some frustration.
Are you traveling a lot to Boulder?
Yeah, I just got back from there, and
that's pretty extensive.
This whole illness started before I left, and so I had to do that whole trip, feeling like this.
Oh boy. Oh, wow. Well, after the break, I want to ask you about ascension and tie that into things that are happening on this planet today.
That is the ultimate question right there. That's what it all comes back to.
It's a different kind of world these days, David. It really, have you ever seen the planet so topsy-turvy?
It's very bizarre what's happening. And again, I think the most astonishing thing, which my insiders would agree, is how the heck things stay together. When you have these groups that are doing everything they can to create fake Islamic terrorism and try to create World War III and topple the economy and send us all into concentration camps, and they just can't get it to work.
They try.
They sure do try, and you're seeing the evidence all the time. San Bernardino, there's reports of white guys involved in the shooting. The Paris shootings, there was involved white guys that looked like bodybuilders that were doing the shooting. Why would Islamic terrorists want to work with white guys? They're going to send in drone strikes and blow everybody up.
Well,
you got to think a little bit.
That's true. David Wilcock, by the way, you can see the show I did with him on BeyondBelief.com. But, David, how can people watch your shows?
Well, I would say that use my website as the portal, DivineCosmos.com, and then from there you can read my latest articles where I'm describing in great detail what I was just mentioning.
That'll take. Okay, stay with us. When we come back in a moment with David Wilcock, we'll talk about ascension. Perfect time for that, too, isn't it, this holiday season? I'm George Norrie, back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you along with David Wilcock. David, let's talk about ascension. What is ascension?
Well, it depends on your interpretation. There's obviously the word, which conjures up different things for different people. I think the Western Judeo-Christian listener is apt to associate it with a Christian interpretation in which we have Jesus going to the cross and his body is biologically dead. They identify it as such. They pierce him. He drains. They put him in this cave, and he comes back 3 days later in what they call the resurrection. Well, another name for the resurrection is the ascension. And remember that if this eyewitness account that's recorded in the Bible is in fact true, that people did not recognize him. He had enough of a different look in this new form that he had to actually prove it was him by showing the holes in his hands. So the interesting thing when you get in biblical aspect of this is that there are all kinds of references to the idea that we are going to be going through a similar process of this light body activation. So in the grandest scheme of things, going through ascension is akin to becoming like the greatest superhero in any of these Marvel comic book movies, being able to control matter with your mind, levitate, see the past, see the future very easily with your consciousness, and be able to do a lot of good for others, to essentially become a much more divinely focused being. And it appears that life on Earth is intended to produce ascension, that we're intended to go through this graduation. And what I find distinctly fascinating is that this is not just a Judeo-Christian prophecy. It goes way beyond what's just in the Bible. There's over 35 different ancient cultures that all predict that this is what's going to happen to us. And most people who identify as Christian, they don't have any idea about this, which I find also fascinating.
That's true. No, that is absolutely true. Now, back to the Casey readings then.
Sure.
Was he very specific about the rapture, about end times?
Yeah, I mean, there's a Casey reading that I used to quote right on the front page of my website, where, and I'm not going to get it word for word accurate, but it was something to the effect of, "Know ye not that he has given his angels charge concerning thee, that they might bear thee up? Believest thou, or art thou just wondering?" And if you decipher what he's saying there, he is obviously God, which unfortunately the original Aramaic that we now call father or he is a genderless term. That's another weird thing that it turns out happened. So people think, oh, it's patriarchal. No, the original wording was not. It was just changed that way. So this father, mother, God, Casey reading says they're going to bear you up, which is a direct reference to the scenario you see in the book of Revelation, where, and in fact, this was one of the things I used to really focus on in my earlier years on the web, Revelations 11:11, where it says that there's a 3.5 day period where the righteous on earth, and you can take that term to mean a bunch of things, are essentially greatly beaten down by their adversary, and then they rise up in some way, and this is where most people get this idea of the rapture. You know, it comes out of this one quote, and the idea being that angels appear and these people are born into the heavens is the wording that's used in Revelation. So, you know, the Casey readings say, basically, this is what you were told is going to happen. Do you believe it, or are you just going to wonder about it? And they're very strongly implying, yes, this is going to happen. Something like this is going to happen. But again, you can't get stuck in just thinking this is a Christian prophecy, because with that comes so much baggage, including people who are cartoon characters, because they're so fundamentalist that they think that anybody who doesn't believe exactly the way they do is going to burn in hell for all eternity. And a loving God is not going to sentence a bunch of people on an indigenous island that have never heard of Jesus to burn. It doesn't make any sense at all. The loving God wouldn't just kill people off at random if you weren't lucky enough to get Christian missionaries to come in and conquer your island.
Do you believe that end times are near, that we might be in it now?
Well, again, this term end times does have a lot of connotations and a lot of baggage associated with it. So if I can clarify that those baggage and those connotations do exist, then I would say yes. It is not, in fact, my interpretation of what is described as the tribulation in the book of Revelations is not something that we are waiting to see. It is very actively something that is happening right now. But what astonishes me is that the identical prophecies appear in the Mahabharata. They appear in Buddhist texts. They appear in ancient Native American prophecies over and over and over again. They appear in Mesoamerican prophecies. They appear in Celtic prophecies, Irish prophecies. They appear in Buddhism. They appear in Judaism. They appear in Islam. Wherever you go, everybody's telling us there's going to be a time of great suffering and pain on earth, which appears like it's the end of the road, but it actually is the false bottom of the bottomless pit that then blows us into this whole new reality. And it's all part of this activation of a global awakening that is triggered by a time of intense suffering that we're now going through.
Can we change the future, in your opinion, David?
That question is rigged, and the question implies that the future is negative.
Would I rig it? Me?
I wouldn't put it past you, buddy. I wouldn't put it past you. You're sitting there thinking about, how can I get this guy, especially now that he's sick.
That's right.
Beat him. Attack dog journalism.
Beat him down, right? But can we alter the future?
Of course. It's a very important point to clarify that there are great misinterpretations about these end-time prophecies. And one of the great misinterpretations is the idea of how bad do we have to suffer before something good happens. And there is a widespread misunderstanding which comes back, actually, now we got to go all the way back to Zoroastrian prophecy, because the Zoroastrian apocalypse has a lot to do with what then was the hand-me-down into things like Judaism, Christianity. And first of all, this whole idea of apocalypse is ultimately a teaching about humanity facing itself, facing the mirror. So what we see as we go through this is a reflection of ourselves. Now, you have to be more attuned to what these prophecies say to get that. This is not a scenario in which we're going to have tidal waves sweeping over the land and you're going to watch yourself and say, well, this is it, I'm dying. This is not a situation in which you're going to be running around and gladly selling off your ounce coins of gold in exchange for a loaf of bread. There are protective, positive, angelic forces that are making sure that our planet does not descend into chaos. But where this gets bizarre, George, is that there are different timelines depending on the karma that you invite. And the word karma is a Hindu word. It's actually karman is the original Hindu word. But Jesus says the same thing, as you sow, so shall you reap. And again, I'm just honoring the fact that this audience is predominantly Judeo-Christian. So
that's true.
You can read it in Psalms, you can read it in Proverbs, it's all over the place. The point is, if certain folks on earth have created extraordinary acts of evil, which they definitely exist, and we can prove that easily, your guests do that night after night. If you've done enough of that kind of stuff, there is a timeline in which, in a sacred process, you will have the honor of suffering. You will have the honor of having all of the traumas that you've caused others come back to you, and that comes in the form of one timeline that is apocalyptic, where all of the prophecies that we've been reading about do appear to happen within your version of the illusion. But then there are other prophecies which affect everybody who is not that evil and everybody who is actually positive, in which the timeline appears to bifurcate, and it is actually an extraordinarily positive event that involves a shift in the whole nature of matter, energy, and consciousness. That's what makes this whole ascension scenario so interesting, is when we really get down into it, it's the question of, is it a gradual ascension or is it a spontaneous ascension?
Or
I can just keep talking, but I want to give you a chance.
Is it both?
I do think it's both. And I have some very weighty evidence in that direction, which we've discussed in other programs, to wit, look at the work of Dr. John Lorber, who is an Oxford University neuropsychiatrist, and is looking at people who have no brain inside their head. They've got hydroencephaly, which is water on the brain, and there's, about 15% of these cases, before they would put shunts in your brain to, shunt out the extra craniosacral fluid, the craniosacral fluid would build up inside the head. The head actually starts to look swollen, and you can literally shine a flashlight through these people's skin, and their head lights up red inside because there's no brain in there. But yet they still can think, and there's even a case of a guy who graduated with a mathematics degree from Cambridge University. But you go inside there, and all he's got is this layer of brain tissue that's as thin as a slice of bologna against the edge of his skull. So if we already have people walking around right now, today, who can think and act, and they do not have a brain, as we would normally think of it, then that means we must have some energetic aspect of who we are. Another one that I want to toss in really quickly is Dr. John Hawkes, an anthropologist from the University of Wisconsin, who has studied human DNA and DNA-tested mummies and found that in the last 5,000 years, there's been a 7% evolution in our DNA molecule, an upgrade, a very decisive change that has changed the structure of our DNA so much that if you DNA test you or me today, George, and compare us to somebody from 5,000 years ago, our DNA is more different than that person from 5,000 years ago would be from a Neanderthal. So we've already evolved more in the last 5,000 years than we did going from Neanderthals to the way we looked in 3000 BC. And that's crazy.
Well,
that's
crazy.
Scientific data. That's not something I'm pulling out of my head. It's actual stuff that I've written about that you can go and read for yourself.
You had said some time ago that you thought disclosure was imminent. I mean, you even thought that it would happen with Barack Obama flanked by some ETs. Whatever happened to that?
Well, this gets into a whole other category of discussion, which is a battle that is raging between factions that consist of a large percentage of the American military intelligence apparatus, which is now opposed to the big banks. So we're getting into an area now where you're dealing with a war that offends people's normal sensibilities that we've all seen from, Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
Where, that's one team and that's the other team. And so we're taught a particular country is a particular team. Oh, China is bad. The British are bad because, look, they got this divine right of kings, and that's where the City of London bankers are. And, America is bad. The CIA is bad. The NSA is bad.
Everything's bad.
And you can't look at it that way. There is an insurgency that is very, very powerful. And that insurgency made its way into some of the most successful movies of the last few years. Iron Man 3 is a movie about ISIS. The villain in Iron Man 3 is an ISIS-style fake terrorist bin Laden, who's not anything but a sock puppet of the Vice President of the United States, who at the end of the movie gets handcuffed and dragged off and is obviously meant to indicate Cheney, just like the president in Iron Man 3 is obviously meant to be George W.
Well, I got to tell you, something as bizarre is happening with ISIS. I mean, the banks, where are they getting their money, the oil fields? I mean, the whole thing, it just doesn't sound right to me.
Well, I quoted extensively in my last article, Disclosure Showdown, from an insider named Elliot Stern, who worked at HSBC Bank and personally witnessed hundreds of billions of dollars being transferred directly into the hands of multiple terrorist groups all over the planet.
They should be shut down for that.
And they actually were fined twice. HSBC paid a $1.2 billion fine.
Which is nothing for them.
Right. It's like a week of their profits. Then they got fined again because of Elliot Stern's findings. Oh, we'll never do it again. Well, I'm sorry, but you have to open your eyes and you have to see that ISIS is fulfilling certain groups' agendas. It is a proxy army.
Yes, it is.
And the war is over the control of oil, because with the control of oil comes the control of money, and with the control of the world's money supply comes the ability to determine who lives and who dies, who eats and who starves. And it is a battle for global control. And one of the things that I find so infuriating is people who may actually be government-paid trolls who are saying that everybody is part of the bad guy. That is not true.
I mean, yeah, all you have to do is look at Syria, where we're supporting ISIS to get out Assad, but we're not supporting ISIS outside of Syria. It doesn't make any sense.
It's very bizarre that a staunch U.S. ally in NATO, Turkey, would shoot down Russian warplanes that were eliminating the ISIS threat right after ISIS had blown up over 100 people's lives in Paris with machine guns.
Exactly. And as we remember a year ago, the snake column of trucks and Humvees belonging to ISIS, with them all waving, not one Apache helicopter, not one fighter jet took them out. You would think our satellites would have spotted that instantly.
And we have leaked memos from the State Department that said, oh, we can't prove they're ISIS and we don't want to create collateral damage.
No, they're only holding the flag and everything else. David, we're going to take phone calls with you in our final hour. What a fast night. David Wilcock with us. His website, divinecosmos.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Are there people living in the inner earth? We've heard talk, remember Admiral Byrd's incredible journey into the center. Let's check in with David on that in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. David Wilcock with us, and your calls here this final hour. David, Corey Good, of course, the whistleblower, recently revealed some information about people living in the inner earth. Tell me more about that and what role this might be.
Well, it's a fascinating new subject.
Sure is.
It appears that, and I had heard this from other insiders going back a number of years, that our planet, and in fact all watery planets, are designed intelligently. There is a divine creator out there that makes the universe. And you know, of course, George, that NASA has now publicly stated that 22% of all sun-like stars appear to have Earth-like watery planets around them.
That's right. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, imagine what happens if in the course of a planet's formation that you get these hollow cavities that form below the surface of the crust, which then have their own biome that is alive, that includes all these weird white creatures and weird white plants that kind of look like mushrooms. And there also apparently is a natural bacteria that forms in there, these thick mats that give off light, so they're photoluminescent bacteria. And what this means is that you can actually live inside caverns in the earth that have visible light, although it's a lot dimmer than the surface. And one of the things that does is it makes your eyes get a lot larger as you adapt to low light conditions. And humans like us, if we live down there long enough, we're going to start looking more like extraterrestrials. It appears that these cavities are used so that more advanced civilizations have a place they can live while they're managing what takes place on the surface, and they have a safe place to go where they will never be spotted, because the rest of us normally are never allowed to go down there. Well, there's been a lot of speculation about this, and there was a very, very noteworthy event in UFO history going back to the 1940s, before the Roswell crash, with the publication of a series of articles in Fate magazine about something called the Shaver Mysteries, regarding a man who claims to have gone into the inner earth and met various good guys that were warring with various bad guys, all of whom live inside the earth. So there's other stories that mirror this as well, and we didn't really have any solid proof, and we still really don't, except that there are insiders who have said that our U.S. government and other governments have been digging underground bases, and they'll have these tunnel boring machines, and sometimes they break through into some place that they're not supposed to go, and there's already people there that say, GTFO. They don't want you there. Turn around and go away right now. And what Corey has brought to the table is that apparently these inner Earth civilizations are now being threatened by what we're calling the cabal. This military-industrial complex had formerly worked with these people and had treaties with them and is now trying to kill them. And as a result, there's 7 different groups of civilizations that would represent groups like people from Atlantis that had technological societies and fled, or some of them fled to the inner Earth when the surface of the Earth was going to go through a catastrophe.
So these are Earthlings?
Yes.
Okay.
They're previous civilizations of folks on Earth. Like there's one group that has blue skin. Those are the people that you read about in the Hindu religious texts like the Vedas and the Mahabharata. They're still around, they're just living inside the Earth now. They're the people that had the Vimana, the craft that fly with no sound, and all that stuff.
Right.
So the idea here is that they have now formed an alliance because their livelihood is being threatened by people on the surface. Now, this is also an interesting subject because some of these inner Earth people do look like Nordic, blonde-hair, blue-eyed humans from the surface, and this gets into that these people actually portrayed themselves to our governments as extraterrestrials from the Pleiades, when in fact they've been here the whole time, and they're Atlantean descendants who had the technology to be able to make underground bases, and that's all they really ever were. But they did not tell us that they lived here for their own protection because they were worried about being attacked, which they are now being attacked. So there's some very interesting stuff going on because Corey hasn't even had a chance to write this up on his website yet, but he had a meeting recently with this Inner Earth Alliance where they finally got the chance to meet these beings that have appeared in these gigantic spheres the size of Neptune and Jupiter that have appeared in our solar system. And again, you have to have the backstory to understand all this. It is on Corey's website, spherebeingalliance.com. We also have a show on Gaia called Cosmic Disclosure that talks about all this. But the point is, there's new information nobody's heard yet, which is that these Inner Earth Alliance people had been asking for a meeting with these beings that are apparently making sure the cabal is defeated. Corey was allowed to witness the meeting, but the communication was telepathic, so he couldn't hear what they said. The Inner Earth people came out of it quite shell-shocked. And without getting into all the detail, because I know we have very little time, my interpretation is that they have been asked to reveal themselves to us as part of disclosure. And I think we are going to find out that underground bases are much more extensive than we thought.
And sophisticated.
Much more ancient, yes.
All right, to the phones now we go. That's a great story. Robert in Baltimore, Maryland. Hello, Robert. Go ahead.
Hello, George.
Morning.
I have a question for David. David, earlier in the year, by the way, you very cleverly avoided answering George's question before about disclosure. But earlier in the year, when you had interviewed David, when you interviewed Corey Good, he said that he thought there was going to be definitely a date before the Christmas, in fact, he said, when there would be disclosure. And he couldn't say, he didn't want to say what it was, but he said it was a definite date, and he knew about it. Now, I'm wondering, what's the update on that? Do you have anything new from that?
I don't. David, do you?
Okay. One of the insiders I have is Dr. Pete Peterson, who was called Mr. Do by Ronald Reagan and worked directly with Rumsfeld, Cheney, all those guys. There's an interview that I have of him with Project Camelot from 2008 that you can watch, or maybe it's 2009, I forget. Anyway, before I say what Peterson said, let me just address the first part of your statement, which is I'm not this is like playing jazz. It's improvisational. And if I'm riffing on one thing and then something else comes along, it's not because I'm trying to evade a question. I would love it if the timelines that we've been given come true. It's been very frustrating to me getting these leaks, deciding what to leak and what to withhold, because if I withhold it, then you guys don't get to hear it. But if I leak it and then it doesn't come true, I look as if I've been discredited. That being said, what Peterson's top allies have told us, and remember now, we're talking about 5 different sources, completely independent, different levels of the military-industrial complex that do not have contact with each other. What we're hearing is that disclosure is inevitable. It is going to happen, and it's a horse race now as to who can disclose first. So we are seeing these guys on the International Space Station taking photographs of space with craft in the photograph and then posting it without comment. We're seeing Pepsi Cola come out with this very bizarre commercial where they talk about a known element of UFO lore, the Black Knight satellite, and say this is real. And they have this sort of come to Jesus moment on the planet where the ETs are going to save us. And I actually just got a text from Corey right now on Skype. He's saying that he did not say that disclosure was going to happen. Let me clarify what did happen. Corey had a meeting with people calling themselves a committee of 200, suggesting that 100 of them are no longer working in that cabal. And they had said that they did not want Corey and me to release information prior to November. My inference, based on that, was that they thought that something would happen in November that would make it irrelevant whether our information came out by then or not. But nobody actually said, David, the disclosure date is going to be in November. What we are hearing, though, and this is not now from Corey's insiders, it's from Pete's insiders, is, well, actually Corey's insiders corroborated some of this, that there is going to be more and more information coming out. There was just a sketch on the last Saturday Night Live about alien abduction. Very provocative sketch. It's getting closer and closer. And again, nobody's going to know how this is going to happen or when this is going to happen until it does. But I do believe that when it does, it is really, really going to change the game. And I want you, the Coast listener who's hearing this right now, to recognize that you are a rock star. You are an insider already. And there are going to be many people who will depend on you for information all of a sudden. All of your friends and family who've laughed at you, who've turned their backs on you, who've said that you were full of it, are going to be coming to you looking for answers and looking for a sense of calm and peace. And you will have a great responsibility to be able to shepherd them into an understanding of how these events that we're now seeing are actually the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and other religious prophecy, and that there is going to be a positive outcome because there will probably be some degree of panic.
I was going to say that there will be panic. There's no doubt.
It's unavoidable. There's people whose whole entire God concept is going to be uprooted. Scientists are going to have a very hard time with this because they religiously worship their belief system, and they have believed that there is no evidence for UFOs and extraterrestrials, but in order to do that, you have to be the ostrich, and you have to knowingly overlook countless wealth of data that is so vast as to be utterly irrefutable in a court of law as proof. It's just voluminous beyond imagination.
Let us go now to Vincent, truck driving in Virginia. You're on with David Wilcock. Vince, go ahead.
Hey, great, thanks.
Sure.
First of all, it's just when I hear people talk about aliens and people living inside the earth, to me it just sounds like a different angle, just like the Christians talking about the Jesus and the people with another twist to the illusion. I mean, he even mentioned it himself. About everybody has their own idea of what's going on. It just sounds like this is just an upgrade to what everybody else has been trying to push on us. But and two, the Bible it forbids against prophecy, and God really forbids. I mean, every other page in the Old Testament, through Deuteronomy, through Isaiah, Jeremiah, they all warn against don't put no faith in people who try to tell the future, whether it's called a soothsayer, a prophet, palm reader. I mean, that's just something else to get you lost in all these different illusions and different things that people are lost in nowadays.
David?
Well, I'd like to respond to that.
It's yours.
I had a lot of fun when Jehovah's Witnesses would come up and knock on my door.
on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock.
Let's get into it. Let's roll up our sleeves and have a discussion. I am a child of a mother who went to Philadelphia Bible College as a fundamentalist Christian. 2 of her classes were one was called Denominational Distinctions and one was called Apologetics. And what she found was that these assertions that people make about what the Bible says, which they defend as axiomatic truths, are merely selective interpretations of given passages in the Bible, which knowingly overlook other passages that refute them. And my mother was enough of a Bible scholar to be able to come up with a wide variety of arguments that refuted much of the classic fundamentalist dogma. And what ended up happening was that she was threatened and wasn't allowed to speak in the class anymore. And they threatened her that if she didn't actually sign a document that said that she believed everything they taught her to the letter, that she would not be given her diploma. And she was forced to sign that, much to her chagrin, because she obviously had poked gaping holes in the dogma. So I do understand that I am a maverick by saying this, and I am going up against extremely hardcore, entrenched, fundamentalist belief systems, and that actually could get me assassinated. I don't think your caller is that angry at me, but other people are angry enough to want to commit acts of violence in the name of religion.
Have you been threatened before?
Absolutely, I've been threatened before. And I want to point out there's a couple passages in the Bible we really need to think about for a minute. One is John 14:12, where Jesus himself says, "As I do these things, so shall you do them, and greater things." Okay? That very blatantly is saying, yes, you will be able to do prophecy. There is another line in the Bible that says, as Corey just sent me a text, your old men will see visions and your young men will dream dreams.
Hi, Corey, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, we got the whole crew here. So, look, I am not in any way trying to alter someone's belief system. If you are a born-again Christian and you're happy in your faith, what I would encourage you to do is to put the message of Christ into practice in your life. Instead of focusing on how other people are wrong or condemned, I would focus on how you can bring the glory of the Lord into their lives by the kindness and the generosity that you show.
David, are Muslims being unfairly attacked right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I went through Arab countries on my own. And I went to Egypt, which, as we saw in some of the revolutions that took place there, it's not necessarily that safe. I went off the beaten path. I walked around in the non-tourist parts of Egypt. And what I found was that when I actually got on the ground, and I did not listen to what the media told me, but I met Muslims themselves, yes, there are countries like Qatar, like Yemen, like Saudi Arabia, that have very strict Sharia law, where you got to be really frickin' careful about what you say and what you do. But the vast majority of practicing Muslims in this world are moderates who are not violent. It's the same thing. You have a small group of religious fundamentalists,
very vocal,
who are extremely violent and very intensely dedicated to their fundamentalist belief system, which isn't even what's in the Quran as much as what's in these other books that are sort of apocrypha to the Quran, like the Hadith, which actually have a much more violent interpretation. The Quran itself...
What do they want, David? Do they really want everyone to convert?
I would say that some religious fundamentalists do believe that the only way that the world can be saved is if everyone adapts to their beliefs. Yes, there are those people out there. I do think there are people who are violent and who feel that those who do not believe the way they do should be killed. But I also would encourage people to look at the fact that there is a cabal in the world that has their own fundamentalist religion, which happens to be Luciferianism. And I think we really need to stop arguing with each other about interpretations of the Bible or, well, you shouldn't be dreaming or having prophecies. And let's look at the fact that we all have a common enemy. And I am not interested in seeing people getting killed. I want to see people live and thrive.
We're going to come back with final phone calls with David Wilcock in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Well, in the waning weeks ahead, of course, we've got the charity CD, the Holiday Magic Co-Style CD, so there's not a lot of time left. But get it for the holidays. It's a great CD. Your favorite Coast to Coast AM guests singing and reading poetry, and it's just a great way to just play it on Christmas Day or any other holiday. Go to Amazon.com, type in Holiday Magic Co-Style, or go to our website where you'll see the little Holiday Magic CD cover. Click that, and you can order it that way. Welcome back. David Wilcock with us, and of course we'll get to your calls. This is our final segment here. David, what's next for you? What are your plans after the holidays?
Well, I am going to be speaking at the Conscious Life Expo.
I will see you there.
I will be undoubtedly ritually, publicly humiliated by you, as you seem to want to do every year now.
And you love it.
Well, it helps sell tickets. How about that?
Yeah, it
that's
does.
A little too honest.
Look, people who are saying, "Oh, what's Nori doing? Abusing David? What's wrong with it?" No, it's not like that, folks. I have him do certain things at these events, and he's a willing participant to do it. Right, David?
I wasn't a willing participant, and you stiffened me on that sandwich, but
that I'm going to make it up to you. I swear to God, I'll make it.
I don't know. I mean, it's been
6 years.
About it for 10 years or something now, and
like
it still
that.
hasn't happened. So I have my doubts.
Well, and I always thought Tom would step up to the plate and buy for me, but he never did that either.
Listen to how he tries to shift the blame away from himself, just like a corporation. I love it.
You like it? See how smooth I am? Politician. Should have run for president. They were pushing me for a while.
Well, you've got quite a platform here, and you could become a pundit, you know.
I would have disclosed. That's for sure. Let's go to Carlos in Hawaii. He's on Oahu. Hey, Carlos, go ahead.
Aloha, George. Hi, David.
Hi, Carlos.
David, you touched before on the financing, and this is something that I've been, I've been along the same lines that you were talking. That the accounts of Robert Chavez at the Cayman Islands, I think that those monies have been used to finance groups such as ISIL, and also down in Mexico, the Zeta Ks. And it's all over, you touched upon this as well, that it's over oil. Originally, the oil wells and the refineries were built by Rockefeller. And the original deal was that the countries, I think, received 15%, and Rockefeller controlled 85%. But he was buying and building the rigs. He was building the refineries, the ships to transport, pipelines. And at the time when Rockefeller first sold gasoline, he was selling it for a penny a gallon. And when he doubled it, they all said he doubled the price, but he went from 1 penny to 2 pennies a gallon. But he had huge investments. And then in recent years, there was the third generation Rockefeller heir, principal heir to the Rockefeller fortunes, renegotiated, made a deal with the countries to change the distribution and come off of the 85%, 15%.
Let me leak a sensational piece of information here,
all right,
which
go ahead.
People don't already know, and that is there is a provision, first of all, post-World War II, in which Japan, for the atrocities that they committed because they were on Hitler's side and they bombed America, they are paying extraordinary war reparations still to this day.
Still. Yep.
To the cabal, which, again, has the control of the U.S. government. And there are certain particular dynastic families, I won't necessarily name them, in which they are still, to this day, making $20 a gallon $20 a barrel on every barrel of oil that is sold goes directly into their pocket.
Wow. Even if the barrelage now is down to $37?
That has made me think that their cut must have been reduced. But up until that recent event, which does appear to be all part of a battle, this sort of duel to the death that's going on.
Yeah, they probably got some kind of plateau number.
The interesting thing about this whole area of financial chicanery is it's obviously so complex, and you can devote your whole life to studying just a portion of it. And I think what's so surprising for people when they get into this is there's so much room to share information with people that you put together on your own that people don't already know, because we've been lied to so much.
Do you believe there's going to be a third world war soon?
Some would say that we're already in it. I think the third world war is actually happening, and I think that it's a war that's being fought in secret over the control of the financial system. And I think that war involves a great deal of cyber activity, a lot of hacking that's been going on that is reported. I think there's all kinds of data dumps that are like Snowden on steroids, and they're just waiting for the right moment to drop this stuff on us. And I think the bad guys and the mega banks are very aware of what's in those data dumps, and they are terrified because it is going to be a checkmate for them once this data is released. But I think the key is the timing. If they were to release it now where the public isn't quite angry enough, then it could be spun around, it could be distorted. So we got to wait for certain key events to take place. It appears, and this gets to the core of what I know, that I know a lot of people, I'm trying to go for the greater good here, what people want to hear me say, what I promised I would say. If you read the latest Benjamin Fulford update, and he is, a former East-West bureau chief for Forbes magazine who's had a lot of great insider data that was very accurate. According to Fulford, we are going to see some fireworks in January and February. So I'm eternally optimistic, let's put it that way.
Well, we shall see. Joe in the Bronx in New York. Hey, Joe, did you hear your emerging artist piece?
Yes, George. Thank you very much.
It's kind of neat, isn't it?
It was great. I wanted to ask you, guest David, why does the disease exist, and what's the purpose of it? And also, if Jesus died on the cross for our sins, past, present, and future, what is the purpose of hell?
Okay, well, those are two totally diametrically opposite questions, but why not? Disease is, at least in the Edgar Cayce version of things, which I'm obviously related to in some way, just my face and my astrology is, very close to his.
Maybe you are the reincarnated.
Disease is essentially a manifestation of some kind of imbalance in the soul, which originates in the spirit, and it then creates a mental conflict. And if the mental conflict is not adequately resolved, it then becomes a bodily issue. So when you get into these alternative treatment modalities, even in the subject of weight loss, I was reading something that I saw on Huffington Post recently, really fascinated me, where they were saying, you can't just go on a diet and expect you're going to lose weight. If you don't deal with the emotional reasons for your eating, you're just going to put the pounds back on. There's a reason why we want to comfort ourselves with food. As to the other question regarding Jesus dying on the cross and how does that message relate to us today, look, I think that did happen, and I believe that when we start to judge and divide, we are not following the message that Jesus was trying to teach us. Now, he also verbalized the idea of people going to hell. In my research, the conclusion was that this is a fabricated reality that was actually not part of Jesus' teachings. There are certain words that he used as metaphors like the word Gehenna, which was the garbage dump in which dead bodies and garbage were burned. And he uses a metaphor of karma and burning off your karma, burning off your impurities. And then when he said that you would have to do this for a cycle of time, the word he used was eon, A-I-O-N, which then gets reinterpreted as eternity. So burn in hell for all eternity actually means purify your karma over a period of time. It's just been greatly misconstrued.
We've got about 8 minutes left here with David Wilcock. How's your voice holding up, David? You all right?
Good enough. Let's go for another one if you don't mind, George.
Carla in Willow Creek, California. Hello, Carla. Go ahead.
Hi. I'd like to ask David why he hasn't done anything with Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot lately. I had listened to the Runers report about Corey Good and some of the information, and I hadn't heard anything, and I was curious where he stood with Project Camelot.
Project Camelot.
I was just on the phone with Carrie last week. We had a very amiable conversation. I do not want to wade into these personal questions. I think that the Ruiner, the people who originally promoted his material as a collective, have decided that he was, in fact, lying to them. They were angry about this because they knew that I would hear that, and there was a very anti-sentiment towards myself and towards Corey. I did speak with this gentleman for a period of time. I liked the guy. I still do like the guy. But he also apparently admitted to people who he was talking to in the forums and such that he had made up everything that he said. I understand that Corey's material is very difficult to swallow. And what I can say is that I've had a practice of recording my dreams every day for 30 years, and this information has been approved through my own internal vetting process with my soul, which is why I stand behind it and why I promote it.
And David, explain briefly who Corey is.
Corey is an insider who came forward originally in 2009 and shared some classified information with me, which I did not disclose on the internet. And then in October of last year, he began disclosing much more of what he knew, and we began a personal dialogue over Skype, which then led eventually to me bringing him out to Boulder, ostensibly to just do a few shows, and having Gaiam want to have an entire show just dedicated to his testimony because they were so blown away by what he was saying, and they believed him.
They did a series on him.
We have an ongoing series called Cosmic Disclosure, and it's just astonishing that I can ask him questions, and we have so much material to cover that we can do a half an hour a week where it's always new and original and fascinating. And that is what people are seeing when they're what's now called Gaia subscribers. It's part of the package.
He seems like a nice guy, too. He's been on the program. He's believable, and he doesn't flinch. You know how you look at some people who might not be telling you the truth? He doesn't flinch.
Well, and I would really encourage your listeners, George, to go and watch the show that you did with him on Beyond Belief, because you've grilled him much harder than I did, and you really tried to push him over the edge.
He wouldn't take it.
And he
stood his ground.
It's astonishing to watch that show.
He stood his ground.
Astonishing for me to be in the room and feel the energy while that was happening.
Let's go to La Jolla, California. Thomas, you're on with David Wilcock. Go ahead.
Hi, George. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure thing,
David,
Thomas.
it's an honor and a pleasure. This is a non-religious question, and it concerns angels. Edgar Cayce, in his writings, stated that his mission started with an encounter with an angel.
That's correct.
And you know, angels are non-denominational. They're in all traditions, whether it's Tibetan Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, native cultures around the world, etc. And so my question, again, non-religious, what role do angels play in the Edgar Cayce, David Wilcock's cosmology in the upliftment of mankind?
I believe that karma, the law of cause and effect, ultimately is very heavily staffed. That synchronicity, dreams, intuitive prompts, being at the right place at the right time, happy accidents, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, is not just in a passive universal law, that there are divine beings who are very actively monitoring us. They love us beyond imagination, and they are steering us towards the experiences and the people and the knowledge that we need to evolve spiritually. And they ultimately are concerned with how forgiving we are, how accepting of others we are, how loving we are. That is the core of their message. It is non-denominational. And I would highly recommend, if there is any truth to this ascension scenario, that we would all be well advised to try to practice that more and more in our own daily lives.
Time for a couple more questions with David, and then the clock is going to get us. Let's go to Lori in British Columbia, Canada now. Lori, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi there.
This is a really awesome show, you guys.
Thank you.
David, I wanted to ask you, you're saying that you really believe you're reincarnated from Edgar Casey?
Yes, he does.
Absolutely.
He does.
I can't remember when. It was like 10 years ago or more. I read something on him, and the article said he was a major alcoholic.
That's not you, David.
Well, no.
I know.
She brings
That's
up
what
a
I'm
good
asking.
point. My book, The Ascension Mysteries, I was asked by my guides to tell my addiction recovery story. There are so many parallels of what Casey went through and what I've had to go through. And I have really had to go through and perfect all of the mistakes that were made in that lifetime. And I can also tell you that all of the most significant people in my life have been major reincarnations from his story. And I'm not disclosing all of them because these are people I still live with and I still interact with every day. So the reincarnation is something that I am very aware of all the time. And my goal is to, try to do what I did before as a new person with a new mission that is very different, where it's not about giving readings and it's not about being unconscious. It's about being part of this volunteer effort that everybody is doing who wants the truth and who loves freedom and doesn't want to see our lives being wasted by those who believe that billions of people need to be killed in order to save the planet.
And time will tell, David. Time will tell if we pull out of this or not. I'm hopeful. What do you think?
Well, I think that the end is actually predetermined in terms of it's a guarantee that there is a bifurcation of timelines where if you are on the negative timeline, you will see Armageddon. You will see pole shift. If you're on the positive timeline, you will see ascension. This is how the universe is designed. This is what happens on every planet. We're only allowed to be given a certain amount of information on this because the mystery is essential. If we were told that this was going to happen, then we wouldn't learn and grow. A very important part of the spiritual process is being shrouded in doubt and then having to exercise faith and will in order to decide what we choose to believe. Because if the answers were handed to us, if angels just appeared out of the sky, we would just automatically want to obey them. But by not really knowing and having to do our own investigation, we are inspired to make the changes that are really necessary, and this is why extraterrestrials do not engage cultures like ours until we're ready for it, because it would spoil us, and we don't get the chance to learn this for ourselves.
David, my friend, be well. Have a great Christmas if I don't talk to you before that. David Wilcock, the reincarnation of Edgar Casey. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesseur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Borles, and George Knapp. I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.